Hi friends, so we are here to talk about the reunion part 1 of The Real Housewives of Potomac season 8. My camera is high as hell, but whatever, this is what we're doing today. So we start off the reunion. We got two clips, honestly some of the biggest things that happened in the reunion, which is why I just really am not a fan of the clips, because they are, first of all, I think we should just get rid of them altogether, but they tend to be clips of the most like noteworthy things that happened, and we've already seen them. So once the show comes on, it's very anticlimactic, but whatever. I say that to say we start off essentially with one of the two clips that we already received, and it's Andy, which I didn't mind this in terms of them having it in the reunion, because I think it's important and it was interesting to hear Andy highlighting that, that the show is about finding common ground and owning up to things and kind of seeing where they can move forward in the group. And I like hearing that, because obviously for an extremely long time, ever since we started watching these ensemble shows such as Real Housewives, we know it's like it's just about watching the ensemble and about watching the glitz and the glam of these housewives and stuff like that. We never really had to outline what the ladies should be working towards, especially at the reunion. Like, what are they here to do besides have reads, right? And entertain us. What is really going on here within this group dynamic? And so it's interesting to hear that, at least, especially for newer viewers, because I say all of that to say, back then it just didn't really exist. Like, it was a lot of fun shade when it came to these shows, such as like, Atlanta, but then, stuff gets dark in each of these different, cities of the housewives. And so then you start to wonder, like, well, what is this group of women doing filming together, because they really hate each other, and it's very abundantly clear. So it's kind of weird. So it is nice to kind of get a check back to what we're supposed to be doing here. Again, especially for newer viewers, because, and I understand this isn't a read on anybody, but if you don't really know where the franchise comes from, and you come in at a time where we're watching a lot of like baddies and all that other stuff, like where there's just a lot of like talk get hit mentality, this isn't that type of show. And so I guess, like, if you're watching that and you're trying to figure out, well, what are the ladies supposed to be doing here, because you get the question a lot, and I know I'm rambling, but you really do get this question a lot on social media of like, well, she's talking all that mess, like, why isn't she prepared for the consequences of getting hit? And it's like, because first of all, that's not really how life should work, and second of all, that's not how this show works. But I understand the confusion, because I know what a lot of people are watching these days, and I'm so sorry, but this is not that show. Let's move on, though. They then do what they do every reunion, which I really hate. Like, oh my god, it's so stupid. But the first segment we're talking about is sex, like the fact that they bond over sex. Like, okay, I just think that's a big waste of time, but I also know you guys are spreading this reunion out upon 3 parts that we just don't need. But fine, I know the ladies get paid per episode, so give them their coins, but we don't need these 3 parts, and we don't need this segment. We also get, at the very beginning of the episode, this read that Karen got in on Robyn, because Robyn loves to just, it's funny that it never changes, but Robyn loves to jump in on things that have absolutely nothing to do with her. And since they are talking about the sex thing, they bring up, when Karen was counting how many partners she had. Look, that was weird, and Karen is not the most transparent. I will have to be honest. I love me some Karen, but she's not the most honest. I'll be honest about that. I'll be honest about it. And so, yeah, she was trying to think about her answer. Like, that was weird, but I'm not going to, what do they say? Don't worry about the things that you cannot change. I cannot change the fact that Karen is not going to be an honest person. Whatever. So, Robyn jumps in there and she's like, okay, so you can't count how many sexual partners you've had. That's clearly what that is. She says, no, girl, that's Juan. Moving on. Now that we're here, we're on a Robyn segment. And basically, she kind of goes through the semantics of it all. I'm really kind of tired of hearing about it. To her credit, her story does stay consistent, but it's also consistently stupid. Very good questions from Andy this reunion, and he does straight up ask her through all the mess, and the saying nothing, do you still stand by, your statement that Juan did not cheat on you? I don't know that she ever said that, but I do think that that's a very good question. Like, let's get down to the nitty gritty of it. And if you listen to the answer, she does say, well, I can't say anything for certain. I don't remember the first housewife that ever used that tool, and played with those words. Like, well, I can't say he didn't cheat on me for certain. It was good the first couple of times, but now every time that it happens, it's very lame. And it's also like, okay, girl, we get what you're trying to do here. You're trying to play with the words. Like, yeah, we know you can't certify it, with the strength of God, the sight of God, but we're asking you, what do you think? And so when you think through the minutia of that, if you're really listening and reading between the lines, she's not saying no, right? So I don't know that she's ever said that Juan hasn't cheated on her since they got back together. I don't even know that she believes that. So it is a good question. It's very interesting to hear that her answer is not no. She also goes further to say, she still believes what he had to say about the story, especially as it pertains to the lady from Canada. And she very vaguely says that there's some stuff that happened after and things that she came to learn, whereby she definitely believes him more now. I think that all sounds very stupid. I thought it was also very entertaining watching the montage, because it's different seeing it along this very drawn out season, but when you see them put all the clips next to each other where Robyn is justifying everything that Juan does, even to the point where she's explaining that he deletes everything out of his phone and that he buys women hotel rooms because he's just so generous, but he can't show up to the reunion for his wife. Those things are very amusing. And I did think that it was interesting to see Andy highlight to Ashley, like, okay, well, you had instances where Michael didn't show up to the reunion. And I loved, honestly, I don't love much of what Ashley does, but I love that Ashley was able to point out, like, yeah, Michael definitely refused to come to some reunions, but after he got caught cheating, he did show up. And after Juan has been caught cheating, and probably still is, Robyn can't certify it, so be damned if we can. He still isn't here. So, but Robyn's fine with it. She doesn't care. Who cares? I would love to be that carefree wife. I don't even have a husband that could potentially be cheating on me, but my anxiety be through the roof about every little thing. So good for Robyn, I guess. Maybe we're missing something. I don't remember what the prompt was, but I like that Candiace was then able to be clear and say, the issue was never whether Juan cheated or not, because Andy did do something which I typically hate when he does it on reunions, but I guess it's a cause for conversation. But he'll talk about something and then he'll ask the other ladies' opinions about it when those things don't really matter at this point. Like, they talk about it during the season, we kind of know. I just think it's redundant and not progressive to talk about at the reunion, but whatever. He basically asked the ladies, who believes Juan. And at the end of the day, that point is just so moot. Like, everybody knows that nobody believes Juan but Robyn. So, I mean, it is what it is. And I like that, like I was saying, Candiace was able to differentiate and say it's not about, believing whether he did it or not. The issue was the fact that she didn't share it and she was being in everybody else's business. And Robyn's excuse continues to be, it wasn't going on at the time of filming, so why would I bring it up? But then at the end of the day, it came out, it still didn't come out during the season technically, but then you voluntarily brought it up on your Patreon. It had to have been at least a year since you guys filmed, so if it wasn't happening at the time you guys were filming it, damn sure it wasn't happening at the time that you voluntarily brought it up on Patreon. So why bring it up then if you don't want to bring it up during the season? And then she contradicts herself to say, like, well, she thought that somebody else was going to bring it up during the season, but that also didn't happen really. So I don't really know what Robyn is talking about, and I don't believe that she is either, but I'm very tired of this excuse of, well, it wasn't happening at the time that we were filming. It still affects your relationship, because she even admitted last season that that's why it took them a little bit longer to get married, because they had to get over that issue. That's part of the story, because we've been asking you for 5 years, which Andy highlighted, when's the wedding, when's the wedding, when's the wedding, and you didn't think to say, like, oh, we had some hiccups because Juan was at a hotel room with a Canadian. But you wanted to talk about it on Patreon. So I'm confused. I don't know why it was more relevant then. Because you were getting your $5? Andy then asked a question, I guess. It was intended to make Candiace look like a hypocrite. I don't remember what the question was. But I assume the way that it was chopped and screwed that it was from, and I don't, because they blanked out the name. I don't know how Candiace ascertained she was there, I guess. But I guess it was a question from a blogger that's friends with Robyn. And this prompts Candiace to bring up this board of, I guess, a group chat, which is brought up briefly during the season, that Robyn is in with these two bloggers. And she's having a conversation about the point when Giselle was questioning her about Juan earlier in the season. And Robyn was saying, which I thought was incredible, incredibly weird. It's not just that it was about Giselle. It's the fact that she's saying, do you think I should, basically, like, I was thinking about posting this. Does this look like something where somebody's concerned or whatever the hell? Just kind of, not necessarily that it's shady, but it feels very weird and strategic to be posting a blogger about something that you should post yourself from your personal account about a show that you're on. That has everything to do with you. So why are you reaching out to third party bloggers about it? It'd be different to be reaching out to a friend and saying, hey friend, what do you think about me posting this? But you're reaching out to bloggers about something that you want to post as it pertains to the show that they report on. And it also has to do with something that is adverse to your bestie, Giselle. So all of that is weird. We didn't necessarily get into it. I didn't necessarily feel like we had to, because I don't think it's any question that Robyn is weird. Andy asks, and Candiace is very clear that she still does believe that, Robyn was deflecting in order to get, information away from the whole her and Juan thing. And she was kind of, on track with the whole Giselle versus Chris thing. And I've already said I don't necessarily agree with that. I understand what her point is, but I don't necessarily agree with the ties. I do still think that she can separate herself from that narrative, though. And I think that she still has a right to be upset with the fact that Robyn was not being honest about her relationship. I don't think that the two have to be combined. Like, I think it is still upsetting that Robyn was not being forthcoming about her relationship with Juan. If the stuff with Chris hadn't happened, I think that would still be upsetting. So, but I don't necessarily agree that, Robyn was in cahoots with Giselle, but I also don't think it's a big deal for Robyn to be like, oh, end of the friendship. But we're going to get to that when, Karen reads her at the end of this reunion part 1. A good question, though. Thank you, God. Like, we talked through all the minutia, but Andy says, what is it going to take, like Robyn and Candiace, from each other for you guys to move forward? And, Candiace immediately gets emotional because I think we've all ascertained, anybody with a brain, that she really felt like she had a friendship with Robyn. And she says also, like, Chris felt like she had one. So she is hurt by it. And her answer, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because it is a good question. I did want the answer. She just wants some acknowledgement. And there are people like that in the world, or maybe everybody's like that at certain instances, where you're just very emotional about something and it may not be rational and it may not be important. But when your friend is telling you that something hurt them, whether you agree with it or not, they might not even really feel like it's that big of a deal, but it still hurt them. All they want is, what does she say? The acknowledgement. And Robyn's just not able to do that. Like, she does a lot of deflecting, and Robyn gets kind of very, like, dismissive and cold when she doesn't agree with things. So I can understand having a feeling against somebody like that as a friend when you're somebody that's emotional like Candiace is, and you honestly speak a lot through emotion. That's how you emote. Like, I don't know what other words to use, and that's your friend. So you should be able to be vulnerable in that space. And that's how you communicate, and they're kind of weaponizing it and using that against you. So I can understand where she's coming from. And speaking of weaponizing, when she starts doing this, Giselle starts laughing. And I don't know if Giselle thought that she's not necessarily like a witty person or whatever, or like a reunion hijinks type of girl. So I don't know if she thought this was going to be like a reading moment, or I don't know. But at the end of the day, she was the only one laughing. Like, Robyn seemed like she was actually interested in hearing, to me, from the look on her face. She looked like she was at least interested in hearing what Candiace was going to respond. Whereas Giselle's kind of holding us up by giggling and laughing and calling Candiace tears. And she's one of the oldest people on the cast. So I just thought that was really stupid. And it's really interesting how much respect you can lose for Giselle, because I've always understood that people didn't necessarily like Giselle from the get-go, but she never bothered me. That was always my stance. So people say, how do you feel about Giselle? I'm like, she doesn't bother me, but now she bothers the hell out of me. And I just also think that Giselle is weird. Like, it seems like she talks like, she doesn't involve herself in social media, but she's calling Candiace's tears fake. And I'm just like, if you're going to throw a read in there, let's have some justification for the read, because that's what makes reads stick. Like, they have an element of truth in them, or at least some foundation. But why would Candiace need to fake tears about this Robyn situation? That doesn't make any sense. I like how Mia jumped in, very first chair of her, and I love how Mia has kind of settled into herself and not very theatrical and irritating as hell. And she says, basically, Robyn wants for Candiace to take some self-accountability, and Candiace wants for Robyn to be a little bit more transparent. And I think that makes perfect sense. And I appreciate that the other ladies, for the most part, are tapped into positively contributing to the moving forward and trying to give some different perspective. Andy essentially asked Robyn, like, where are you at with your marriage with Juan? Like, how do you want to close this out? And she essentially just says the marriage thing, which I didn't hate, like, whatever. When you get married to somebody, you essentially choose to thug it out, and the whole thing of like picking and choosing your battles and what are you gonna go with. Like, they made the choice to thug it out and be in this marriage and be a family. So that's what they're doing. So good for her. We move on to the thing about Gizelle, talking about, it's a Gizelle package, I guess. I don't remember how we got here, but it's her talking about these death threats, and she's very adamant that they came as a result of Candiace. And then Andy essentially asks her why, and she basically explains how it happens. Like, she really just explained, like, well, people said, well, Candiace said, she puts on Candiace, that I treat people of darker skin tone differently, and people hear that and then they send me death threats. But it's not that people were saying that on social media before Candiace even said it. Like, the talk about colorism was happening around this show a season or two before it started happening on the show. And so people have, no matter what the hell Candiace says, there are people that have their own opinions about Gizelle. Period. And nothing is okay about death threats. I hope that it wouldn't be interpreted that I'm defending that, but there's nothing to defend because Candiace didn't do that. But anyway, there are going to be people that have opinions anyway, so people are going to do whatever they want to do, separate from how Candiace feels about Gizelle. It's people that don't like Gizelle that don't even like Candiace. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's not Candiace's fault that she called out something that had already been being discussed, and the result that happened of that had nothing to do with her. And Andy does ask, like, well, did you like some of these tweets? And I think it does matter if there are death threat tweets and Candiace is liking them, because I don't think that you should perpetuate that. That's a bad thing, and I don't think that she would have defended that. But that's also still not a contribution to her causing the death threats. Liking those tweets is not a cause of those death threats. So I just don't want to hear it. Kind of close this out, which I appreciated as well. Like, I just kind of like the way, like, we have the whole back and forth, and sometimes it feels like Andy says, let's move on, and we don't get anywhere. So I like that he's at least putting a period on every topic. And he does ask, like, is there anything, Candiace and Gizelle, that each of you can take accountability for at the very least? And somehow we get into, Candiace's tweet about the sexual assault thing, and basically her opinion that Gizelle pushes back the progression for victims of sexual assault because she falsely accused Chris. And we get into the whole conversation of, well, whether Gizelle's statement about what happened with Chris was actually sexual abuse. And I don't agree with that. I think, I'm not even going to go down what they talked about because there was just so many words, but I just feel like I 1,000% agree with Candiace. Like, she's not wrong at the end of the day. I do like that Karen came in and said it's not necessarily the implication. It's the fact that the way that Gizelle was vaguely talking about it, but she knew what she was doing, which is still an implication. But the issue itself is that there was this blank slate for people to kind of fill in the blanks, which is still kind of like an implication. But I can understand them trying to take that out of it just to say, like, hey, at the end of the day, let's make it bare bones. And the way that you communicated about this situation, Gizelle, was wrong. And therefore, it did lead people, rightfully so, to believe that Chris had done something wrong to you, which could be around a way of, sexual assault, especially if you're saying, like she said this season, he made me go into the room and close the door. He knew, and she said it on the reunion, he knew my room was empty. Those things have implications at the end of the day, and you're saying it because you know that. So I don't like talking around it, and I don't think that is fair. I do think that Candiace's words can be very harsh, so that's why we react like a lot, but what she's saying is not wrong. At the end of the day, she's 1,000% right. Gizelle knew exactly what she was doing, or what she continues to do when she characterizes it like this. And like I said, I like how Karen came in and was filling in the blanks and explaining that and saying, I don't think that is sexual assault the way that it was described, but I understand what you're saying, Candiace. I think that that's fair. Candiace is not wrong. Gizelle is playing a game, and it's a nasty, disgusting game at the end of the day. You don't have to agree with or like the way that Candiace is characterizing it, but what she's saying, the message itself, is not wrong. And I also appreciate production for being able to show the clip of Giselle this season saying basically, well, I don't know why Candiace is mad. It is what it is. Chris made me go into a room. She said it. She continues to say it. So the issue is still there. And again, in constant effort to try to move the ball along, Wendy jumps in and says, okay, we've talked about that, but now can you guys be accountable? We've broken it down, all right? We don't agree, obviously, but can you guys be accountable for anything? And I like that it was more pointed because she says basically to Candiace, if Giselle, we've explained it, right? If Giselle takes accountability for that, can you be accountable for something? And Candiace says, yes, I can be accountable for my response, which is the right thing because that's what Giselle's upset about. She still makes it about these death threats, but it's about the response. So cool. So Giselle, and I can appreciate. I had to think about it. Like, do I want to give her that? I can appreciate that Giselle does say, she did mischaracterize it, and she should not have said "made me." Fine. And they asked Candiace. It wasn't great, but she did it. And they asked Candiace, would that work for her? She said, sure. I feel the same way. Cool. Let's move on. Candiace gives a much more eloquent answer and a response and more accountability than people will give her credit for. But she does say, look, I should not have said those things about you. I also apologize that your kids received death threats. I'm not going to take accountability for that because I did not do that, but I apologize that it happened. Giselle obviously is not trying to accept it. She's going to move the finish line as she always does, and she feels like Candiace should take accountability for the death threats, and that's just not something that's going to happen. But I at least appreciate that exchange occurred. They didn't do this thing about Karen. It's always this thing about Karen and Robyn. Like, what is this beef? And I'm just not invested in it. I think that Robyn is just silly. And I think the plain thing of it is just realizing that Karen is just not with Robyn's silliness. She never has been. So for me, it's not an interesting topic to hear. Like, can you guys say something nice about each other? I think it's kind of corny at this point. The tea of it all is, honestly, let's get past the can you say something nice? What is the issue? And I feel like we got a little bit closer to that this reunion, which I liked, when Karen really got that read in and just said, at the end of the day, Robyn is very strategic in the way that she does this woe is me thing. And she was spot on. And I appreciate that because that's exactly what Robyn did all season. Very woe is me. And it was great to hear from somebody that's not Candiace. And it's Karen very clearly and very factually letting her know, like, girl, at the end of the day, like, because first Robyn's like, well, how would you feel? She breaks it down. Great. We would love to hear it. How would you feel if your friend is going on the internet, saying basically that you were in cahoots with somebody to go against their husband? And Karen's like, girl, that's happened to me. And I still can smile with each and every lady on this stage. Like, at the end of the day, you're trying to make that this big issue that it is not. And the reason that Karen is saying, girl, you're doing this woe is me is because one moment last season, you're putting a speaker on the table on vacation to expose Candiace, and now this season, you're crying on the curb and asking for sympathy, and you're trying to point out that Karen treats you differently. You're full of it, and it's very convenient, and you do the same thing that Giselle does, birds of a feather. Like, when it's time you need sympathy, it's very convenient that you're requesting it, and of all people, you're going to request it from Karen. You know that Karen is not going to just up and choose your side, and this whole narrative of, like, Karen changes how she acts around Wendy and Candiace versus Giselle and Robyn, it's because y'all are always wrong. So she's always going to say you're wrong. Like Karen said, I'm not a neutral. I'm going for what's right. And they're always wrong. Afterwards they take a break and a lot is kind of going on, but it's not really anything important. But the thing that sticks out is this, FaceTime that Mia has with her new man, and they're like doing all the I love yous, you look good, blah, blah, blah. It's all PDA type of stuff. And Gordon's in the back corner. And then he speaks to him via FaceTime, like, hey, how you doing? And da-da. It's very weird to me. And what does that mean? Like, what's going on here? But we do come out to the Mia segment before we close off. And, she explains, which I already talked about last review, that they were high school sweethearts and they kind of rekindled even at a time where she and Gordon were still together. So obviously that was an issue. And for some odd reason, I don't know why Wendy brings it up, but she brings up the thing about Jeremiah. And, basically Mia does admit that there is still a dispute about Jeremiah's father to current date. So it is interesting, and I want to completely understand what's going on in that throuple of a situation. I do think that this first part was fine. Like I would give it like a 7 because I think I got some good answers and I think we got some good questions and I think there was some good conversation and especially about the most important things to me. Like I think we at least got to get into the Candiace and Giselle and they took accountability. At least we kind of got the bare bones of it. I feel like we got to see some of the ladies jump in and kind of reason and help, even Aneka, and then we get basically Karen pulling Robyn's card and past all the goofiness, but just basically showing that Robyn is full of it. And then we talk about Mia. So I thought it was a lot of stuff in here that was interesting. It wasn't super exciting, I guess. And we didn't waste too much time, but we wasted a little bit of time, like on the sex topic. But I think that we touched on some good stuff. I will say that I think it's productive. So I'm invested in coming back to the next part, and we will see what happens there.